Hey, what's up guys, it's TJ here, and today we have another Wednesday video. Today we're going to talk about lenses. On our last video we talked about stabilizing shots and getting nice, smooth, cinematic shots, and underneath that video you guys asked for me to talk about lenses. So today we're going to talk about lenses, and this is going to be a really condensed, simplified version of everything you need to know about lenses. I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible, but before you go looking for lenses, you need to know what type of camera you have. If you have a full frame sensor or if you have a crop sensor, it can really affect these lenses and how they operate on your camera. It mostly affects what these lenses can capture on your camera.
So this camera is full frame and this one is cropped. So I can take the same lens and put it on this camera and get a different image on this one.
To give you a good example of this is an image from a full frame camera with a 50mm lens on it. And this is an example of a camera with a crop sensor with the same 50mm lens at the same exact location. So keep in mind throughout this whole video that a 50mm lens on a full frame camera is truly 50mm. And a 50mm lens on a 7D, which has a 1.6 crop factor, is actually around 80mm. If you have any trouble determining this, just take your crop factor from your camera and times it by the focal length of your lens, and that will give you the answer. So now that we have that out of the way, when talking about lenses, there are two things that you have to worry about, just two numbers that you really want to focus on, and that's the focal length and the aperture. Focal length is a number that typically ends in mm or millimeters. This affects the zoom or how much is in view. And the aperture is a number that is typically seen right after the letter F, and it's also known as the f-stop. Now this number affects something called the iris. It's responsible for the depth of field and how much light you can bring into the camera. So lenses come in all different types and all different focal lengths, and this is something that you kind of really want to need to know what's going on here with these different numbers and different types and all that stuff. You need to know how these affect your videography or your photography. There's wide angle, there's standard, and there's telephoto. Now a lot of people might not agree with me. Depending on who you ask, they might have a different opinion on this, but 35mm for me is the standard zoom. Now I'll say this to keep it simple. 35mm is standard zoom. Anything above that is telephoto, and anything below that is wide angle. So just think of 35mm as a standard, or the normal view that a human would have with, the human eye. 35mm lenses are typically used in interviews or in formal settings. Like this would be an example of a situation where you would use a 35mm lens. And to go to 35mm, it would actually probably be something like this. It's about 35mm on this camera. Let's zoom back out. 50, 85, and even 200mm is typically used in more intimate settings, like a wedding or some type of portrait shoot, something where you want to get nice and close to your subject and you want to feel more intimate with the subject. Wide angle lenses are typically used in situations where you want to kind of show off some scenery. You want to show off a grand architecture or show off some grand landscape. Those are situations where you would typically use a wide angle lens. But right now I'm actually using a wide angle lens, and I actually like how it looks. Now these are just tips or rules of thumbs that you can go by, just guidelines, but you don't have to stick to them. I mean, 50mm, 85mm, they typically make the human face look better or more appealing because they actually flatten the human face and doesn't make it look really round. If you use a wide angle lens on a human face, it kind of makes your face look more round. I mean, you can actually tell by looking at me now and then looking at me as I zoom in. My face looks more flat here than it does here. It actually looks like it kind of rounds out. And that doesn't look as flattering if you were to be shooting a woman or a close-up of a man or anything like that. Doesn't look pretty and typically is frowned upon. But you can use your creative mind to jump outside of these guidelines and do whatever you want. Lenses can also be considered fixed or zoom lenses, and this will be considered a zoom lens. You can see I can change the composition if I just move the zoom in or out. And on some lenses you're not able to do that. You actually have to move the camera itself or move your feet to actually change the composition. So a fixed lens just means the focal length of the lens is fixed at one focal length, say 50mm. You'd have to move forward or move away from the subject to actually change the composition. As far as zoom lenses, some are capable of going from like 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters. So you're actually changing the zoom to a wider zoom or a tighter zoom from going to 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters. In some cases, zoom lenses are known to produce less sharper images than a fixed lens. Sometimes it's been known to make photographers less creative, and they just sit there and zoom in and out. They don't change the perspective, they just change the composition. A zoom lens can also have a variable aperture. Sometimes you'll see something like 3.5 to 5.6, f3.5 to 5.6. And that just means that your aperture will change as you change your zoom. So if you're at 24 millimeters, you may be at 3.5, but at 70 millimeters, you'll be at 5.6. And what this does is it affects how soft or how blurry the background is. A good way to understand f-stop and how it affects the field of view or how much is in focus is to think about it in slices. Let's say f1.8 is one slice. That slice is how much would be in focus. And as you increase that number to 3.5 and 5.6, more and more is in focus. So if you want a more blurry background, you bring the f-stop down to the lowest number possible on your lens. Now, some lenses have lower f-stops and some lenses have higher f-stops, but that just determines the capability of that lens and how shallow it can make the depth of field in your particular image. So I know a lot of you guys wanted to talk about settings as well. I'm not sure how to go about talking about that, but this was a good start here, and maybe we'll talk about that next time. Let me know in the comments below what you guys would like to hear more about lenses or more about any other topic in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.